on, guys? We're going to talk about on this video the unconstitutional judicial rulings of depriving individuals, and probably just not individuals, but companies as well, of free religion. Try to, I guess, the misinterpretations of it too. Judicial tyranny. It points out the overstepping and the overreach of the judicial system, and it's not just in the judicial system; it's also in Congress as well, where they created the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, which it violates the First Amendment also, where it says Congress shall make no law. It doesn't matter if it's good or bad. They can't make no law. They can't inhibit or prohibit, right? Now you got the judicial system, and they can't make rulings outside the law. They can't make their own self-opinionations, that contradict law or constitutional rights, which they have done. They've overstepped it. The First Amendment of the Constitution is not an amendment that can intertwine with other amendments. There is no government interest, compelling government interest in the First Amendment. It's off limits, completely off limits. You can't take the First Amendment and say, hey, you know what? We're going to intermingle it with the Second Amendment. This guy's First Amendment right is violating this guy's Second Amendment right, so we're going to take this guy's First Amendment right away from him. Sorry, that's not how the First Amendment works. When you do research on it, you're going to find out that the First Amendment is a standalone amendment. That's why it was first. Congress shall make no law, which means complete off limits to government. Because everything in the government works by law, including the judiciary system. The judicial system, it can't self-opinionate. It can't take a personal opinion of the judge and put it into action, and put it into order, or put it into law, or make a law out of it, or make a case law out of it, because it's invalid. Now, it has been said that that if a Supreme Judge, or actually any kind of judge, were to make a ruling and it becomes case law, then it's effective until it is removed or corrected or whatnot. It don't become null or void, which I don't agree with that. And it don't make sense, because if Congress makes a law, Congress has the main authority. If Congress makes a law that contradicts constitutional rights, it can become null and void, right? Now, the Supreme Court is not to extend their authority beyond Congress. Congress's authority is law, so that says that the Supreme Court cannot extend their authority beyond the law, right? So they got to work in the law. So if it's not lawful, then it's dictation. It's invalid. It's null. I mean, it's deprivation, right? The first law of America is the Constitution. The Constitution was written, believe it or not, it was written before Article 3. That's where the court system is created. The Supreme Court system, the inferior courts, that's what gives them their authority, is Article 3, backed up with acts like judicial acts and so on and so forth, right? But they can't work outside the law. And if the law says it's lawful, they can't say it's not lawful. And if the Constitution says it's a free right, they cannot say it's not a free right. Right? The First Amendment says Congress shall make no law. So if there's no law there, then what law is there to enforce? Right? You got the government, which is secular, and then you got religion, that's non-secular. You can't turn a non-secular into a secular, and you can't turn a secular into a non-secular. It's they're antonyms. They are far apart from one another. You cannot intermingle. There is no middle ground. That's why government's prohibited, because religion is not secular. It's not secular. Government is. That's why it's a clear separation between church and state. We coexist. We don't, even though we live in America, on the land of America, it's not really America's land. It's not the government's land. It's not the people's land. It's God's land. Right? Let's go ahead and jump into this. The First Amendment: sovereignty, judicial tyranny, and religious suppression. The First Amendment guarantees freedom of religion, speech, press, assembly, and petition, forming the foundation of constitutional liberty. However, Supreme Court rulings have distorted its original intent, replacing religious sovereignty with governmental regulation. Through judicial activism, precedent-driven erosion, and misinterpretation, the court has systematically deprived individuals of religious freedom, contradicting both constitutional principles and divine sovereignty. Additionally, there exists a fundamental divide between secular government law and non-secular divine authority, a divide that cannot intermingle, as Luke 16:26 states. And besides all this, between us and you there is a great gulf, and they that which would pass from hence to you cannot, neither can they pass to us that would come from thence. Despite the clear separation, government institutions are attempting to regulate faith-based practices acting entirely outside their legal jurisdiction, a violation akin to an American judge traveling to China and attempting to enforce a U.S. law, despite having no authority to dictate rulings in a foreign land. Just as a court cannot rule beyond its domain, neither can a secular judge dictate matters that belong solely to God, which is non-secular. This document will expose the breach of judicial authority, demonstrate how secular law is being weaponized against divine order, and reveal the rebellion of American legal systems against constitutional biblical truth. The First Amendment's original meaning and its biblical foundations. The First Amendment states, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, or prohibit the free exercise thereof, or abridge the freedom of speech, or of the press, or the right of the people to peacefully to or the right of the people peacefully to assemble, and to petition the government from a redress of grievance. The Free Exercise Clause affirms that practices must remain free from government intrusion, while the Establishment Clause ensures that the government does not impose or privilege any religious domination. James Madison, in his Memorial of Remonstrance against Religious Assessments, 1785, made it clear that duty to the Creator takes precedence over civil authority, implying that religious obligation supersedes governmental jurisdiction. Madison's use of the KJV, which is King James Bible, in constitutional formation. Yes, he did use that. It's actually it's not considered as one of the founding documents, but it is one of the founding documents. Just like his Memorial of Remonstrance against Religious Assessments, the Declaration of Independence, and yada yada. The KJV Bible is actually one of the founding documents as well. It's just not officially labeled that. James Madison was a Baptist, and his worldview was deeply shaped by the King James Bible. As a believer in unalienable rights granted by God, Madison's drafting of the Constitution and the First Amendment, reflecting his biblical convictions. He believed in freedom of conscience, aligns with scriptural truths found in the KJV, reinforcing the separation between divine duty and governmental control. The foundational idea that government must not regulate religious beliefs or practices echoes passages such as Matthew 22:21. Excuse me. Render therefore unto Caesar the things which are Caesar's, and unto God the things that are God's. James 2:17. Even so faith, if it hath not works, is dead, being alone. Which is basically saying, faith without works is dead. However, 1 Peter 2:16 warns, as free and not using your liberty for a cloak as maliciousness, but as the servants of God. This verse emphasizes that while religious sovereignty is unalienable, it is not a license for lawlessness, but rather to call to righteousness, obedience under divine authority. Secular law versus non-secular religious practice. The kingdoms of the world are governed by Satan. Scripture makes clear that earthly kingdoms are under Satan's influence. Luke 4:5-6 states, all this power will I give thee, and the glory of them. For that is delivered unto me, and to whomsoever I will I give it. Satan has been allowed temporary rule over over the world's legal systems. And his greatest strategy is to use governments to suppress divine truth. Secular law, when used against God's order, is a tool of rebellion, designed to erode faith-based living and enforce human control. The judiciary is operating outside its jurisdiction. God has established his own law as supreme, and human governments have no authority to override divine order. Romans 14:4 states, who art thou to judge another man's servant? To his own master he standeth or falleth. When courts attempt to regulate faith-based observance, they are acting outside their domain, much like a judge from one nation trying to enforce his law in another country where he holds no authority. The U.S. government and judiciary have no rightful jurisdiction over spiritual matters, yet they continue to impose secular rulings upon religious observance. Judicial inconsistencies. Religious rights granted to some, denied to others. The Supreme Court and lower courts have repeatedly contradicted themselves in cases involving religious liberty, selectively granting rights to one group while denying them to another under identical circumstances. This breaches the Judicial Code of Conduct, which requires consistent application of precedent. Hobby Lobby versus Burnwell compared to Masterpiece Cake Shop versus Colorado. Both cases involved businesses citing religious convictions to refuse participation in government mandates. Hobby Lobby granted full religious exemptions. Masterpiece Cake Shop penalized despite citing identical religious objections. Contradiction: the court protected corporate religious freedom while limiting individual religious exercise. The church restrictions during COVID-19 versus secular gathering. Churches faced strict limits while secular businesses operated freely, exposing legal double standards. Contradiction: the judiciary restricted religious gatherings but permitted secular activities, violating the First Amendment protections. Which is, they're putting a privilege above a right, and they're turning the right into a privilege. That's exactly what they're doing. They think that they had the right to do that, to interpret the Constitution that way, and that's not interpretation, that's manipulation. It's altercation. They're changing the meaning of the Constitution without changing the Constitution. And they don't have the right to do that. They don't have the authority. Employment Division versus Smith, 1990, compared to Fulton versus Philadelphia, 2021. The Supreme Court ruled in contradictory ways. Yeah, that was a tough word for me. Sometimes allowing government to restrict religious practice, other times affirming strong protections. Contradiction: religious liberty was upheld in one ruling but overridden in another, proving judicial control over faith-based rights. The Bible warned about power, corruption, and lawlessness. Scripture warns that human institutions become corrupt when power is unchecked. That's the problem right here. That's what we're all facing. Because it's unchecked, because the citizens don't know they have that right to put them in check. They don't know the law. They don't know their rights. They just live day by day thinking that they're free and saying, just obey, just obey. They thinking that, because a police officer says something or a judge says something or rules something that it's right. No, it's not. And that's the problem. That's the problem, they are unchecked because we're not stepping out and keeping them in check. Ecclesiastes, I think that's how you say it. I could be wrong. 8:9. Another to his own hurt. 2 Thessalonians 3:4, or 3-4. That man of sin be revealed, the son of perdition, who opposeth and exalted himself above all that is called God. Judiciary rebellion against consistent legal proceedings proves lawlessness prevails, mirroring the warning that Satan's influence over earthly kingdoms lead to moral corruption. Conclusion: the battle between divine sovereignty and rebellion, Christ declared, "My kingdom is not of this world." John 18:36. No amount of judicial manipulation or government intervention can override God's sovereignty. Court rulings have placed secular governance above divine law, reflecting against righteousness. This document serves as a call for accountability, demanding judicial correction of unconstitutional rulings and a restoration of religious autonomy. Yeah, that word. An end to government suppression and faith-based practices. Now, in Scripture, I don't know exactly where it's at. You could probably pop it into the UR engines. Scripture also says to seek God's kingdom. My kingdom is where seek my kingdom. To seek His kingdom is to follow it. Right? You're going to follow it until you find it. Right? So, in order to follow Jesus also and to seek God's kingdom is to obey His law and expect that kingdom to accept you if you're not following that law. If you can't put that into action, they don't want you in their country, right? If you're going to break their law, they're going to arrest you and probably ship you back, right? So how are we going to be able to follow God's law and seek His kingdom when you got Satan sitting on the bench telling you you can't practice your religion? You can believe what you want. You can have your own opinion, but when you go to put action into it to please your God, you can't do that. Well, you know what? Do it, and I don't care what anybody says. Man is not my boss.